I'd ask that you pray with me and for me as we consider this topic today. We made a way. We made a way. Have you ever tried to walk into a space that you know you belong in, but somehow the room tells you otherwise? It's not because you lack the skill, not because you haven't earned the right to be there, but because there is something about you, something about your story, or something about your identity, or your way of showing up in the world that doesn't match the mold of the room it was built for. And the sting isn't always in what people say. Sometimes we feel that isolation based on what folks don't say. We see the side eyes, we see the hesitation before any kind of engagement, the sense that the rules were written without you in mind. In the movie Across the Spider-Verse, Miles Morales enters a high-level multiverse assembly, otherwise known as the Spider Society, where he hopes to belong. And despite his abilities and in spite of his character, there is clearly some tension there upon his arrival. He doesn't quite fit the mold of folks in the Spider Society. He did not fit or belong in the canon, and the Spidey Society is hesitant. It's not outright rejection, because we know that that would be wrong, but instead it's the quiet whispers of, well, you weren't meant to be here. The systems that he needs to belong to aren't broken. These systems just weren't built for someone like him. I also think about the movie, y'all can tell I watch a lot of movies, the movie Hidden Figures. There's this powerful, gut-wrenching scene where Katherine Johnson, a brilliant mathematician, black woman, doing the work of keeping men in literal orbit who cannot even use the bathroom in the building. It's not because she's not qualified, but because, and it's not because she hasn't proven herself, but because no one thought to make sure that there was a bathroom for her to use. The building was designed without her in mind. So she's running in the rain, half a mile each way, carrying numbers in her head and dignity in her heart, soaked in exhaustion, and nobody even noticed until she broke down right there in the room. And in that moment, the truth was made abundantly clear. She wasn't kept out by the villains. She was blocked by a system, by people who claim to be on the same side. And that's the part that hurts and cuts the deepest, because exclusion always stings more when it comes from the very spaces that ought to be the safest for us. So what do you do when the place that holds healing and the place where possibility is supposed to be real and all of the things, what do you do when those spaces, the church, the school, your family, does not make space or room for you? Anybody ever been in that space where you've gone somewhere and there is no room for you, not because you don't belong there, but because it was not built with you in mind? That is where we're going to start today in this particular pericope found in Mark chapter 2. Jesus had come home. That's where the text starts us. He had been out healing the sick and raising the dead, teaching, and now he returns home to Capernaum. The folks are crowded in, the text says. The word gets around quickly. Jesus is here, and folks come from north, south, east, and west to pack the house so tight that there is no room left, not even outside of the door. The folks want to get their healing. The folks want to touch Jesus. They want to see Jesus. This hunger is a real hunger, y'all. These are not just peripheral folks. These are people who want to receive the healing and the touch of Jesus. They wanted to receive the healing and the touch of Jesus so much that they kept other folks out. But let's not miss what the text says happens next. A man who cannot walk is carried to the house by 4 others, but they cannot get inside the door. They couldn't get inside the door, not because Jesus wasn't available, not because Jesus was unwilling. They could not get inside the door because the room was full. There was no space left in the crowd because the folks got there early and they staked out their seat on the pew. They staked out their seats in the room. The folks got there early and said, no, this is our space. The folks got there early and no one else could get in. Can we sit with that just for a minute? Sometimes it is those of us who are closest to Jesus. We are the very ones blocking the way for other folks to get in. And it's not because we're trying to be mean. It's not out of a space of malice. It's more out of a space of routine. We know what it means to come early and fellowship over in the fellowship hall, and then we come into the sanctuary and we find our seat with our name on it. And we don't greet and we don't invite, and we keep folks just outside of the door. Do you know what it means to be so close to healing, so close to what you are needing from the source? You're so close to hear all of the laughing and the music over in the fellowship hall, and to worship and to hear all the folks worshiping inside, but still be standing outside of the door. The text tells us that this man is paralyzed. Paralyzed, he said. Now, let's be honest. Paralysis comes in more than just physical ways. Sometimes you are paralyzed by grief. Sometimes you are paralyzed by rejection or fatigue, by the constant work of trying to prove that you belong in the space. And what's powerful about this particular text and this particular passage in Mark is that the paralyzed man doesn't even get to speak. The text gives him no voice. He is literally being carried, the text said, and that's not just a logistical notice there. That is theology, if you will. There are moments when you cannot face your way forward. This man is in the text. He has no voice. He is paralyzed. And by the end of the text, Jesus declares his faith has made him healed. You have to be held. Sometimes you have to be carried. You have to be trusted by people who see you even when you cannot move yourself. So let's talk about those people now. Who are the people that are carrying you? The folks who carried this man in our text, they didn't have any names either. no titles, no bishops. They had no qualifications, if you will. They are just people who saw somebody outside the door who could not get in on his own, and they said, we will make a way. And here's the part that hits me. They didn't stop just because the door was blocked. They didn't say, oh, next time we'll get them in there. This is when they took it upon themselves to say, we are going to make a way. They tore open the roof, it says. And that's not an easy thing to do. Historical data suggests that roofs in the first century Palestine were made of beams that were laid across stone and mud walls, layered with branches and reeds and packed mud and clay. And so tearing through it was not an easy feat. It was destruction. It was literally loud and messy and risky and probably, Stephanie, it was probably expensive. The structure of this particular passage in Mark is revealing. This is still pretty early on in Jesus' public ministry. We are in chapter 2, but already Jesus' ministry has begun to swell. Everything in this particular book in the Bible happens immediately and at once, and that's how Mark rolls. And yet, here is this moment, and it is disrupted by immobility. There's nothing happening until the men begin to tear the roof off. He shifts attention to the folks who are tearing the roof off. He shifts the attention to the community that surrounds the vulnerable, and he shifts the community. Now, the Greek verb that is used here in this particular part of the text was that when Jesus saw Dawnn, that doesn't mean just a casual glance. No, it's the same root used when God sees the folks in the Hebrew scripture. It's an empathetic, it's an intimate seeing. I see you. And when Jesus forgives the man's sins before he heals his body, he introduces a theological tension that kind of rattles the scribes. In Mark, this is the first recorded controversy with religious authorities, and it's not about ritual or Sabbath. The tension here is about access. You all, I can't talk about access enough. Access and forgiveness, it's about the authority to liberate someone. And that's not a side note. That's the shape of this particular gospel. And these men who lowered the paralyzed man into the roof, they did this knowing full well that the folks inside would be upset. They interrupted the sermon. They interrupted the hymnal. They interrupted the moment. They interrupted all of the glitz and the glamour of what was happening inside the building with Jesus, and they did not care. They did it anyway, because when someone you love is hurting and dignity sometimes then has to take a back seat. When you're trying to get healing, sometimes when you have been excluded for too long, sometimes you just have to rip the roof off of the building. I cannot stop thinking about. I've been thinking about this text all week. As most of you all know, I was sick last week, and I found myself in the hospital, and I found myself not able to move. This happened on Tuesday, July 29th. But before I say this, let me tell you that when we talk about access and we talk about these men lowering this paralyzed man into the room, let me tell you that being carried and having to rely on other people is not easy. It's humbling. It's vulnerable. You don't get to call the shots, and you don't get to say when it happens, what happens. You don't get to protect your pride. Some of us have spent our lives carrying other folks emotionally and spiritually and financially even, and the thought of being the one that has to now be carried is terrifying. This kind of surrender is really heavy. And sometimes what keeps us on the outside is not the crowd. It's our own fear of being that vulnerable. So let me tell you what my experience was when I wasn't here last week. So on Tuesday, July 29th, I was experiencing some stroke-like symptoms, but I brushed it off. I'm like, I'm 47. What do you mean? And so I'm like, no, I'm going to work. And so on the next day, Wednesday, I drove myself to work. And by 10 a.m. on Wednesday, I was rushed to the ER. They gave me a CAT scan, an MRI, a cognitive test, and by the end of it, I could not move the left side of my body. I could not move my arm. I could not move my leg. I did not understand what was happening in the room. I had no comprehension of what was going on. You all, I failed the cognitive exam. Me, Dr. Brumfield, could not say the word tiptoe, and I could not say the word cactus. And so I was afraid. And the diagnosis that they gave me was functional neurological disorder. In other words, they don't know what happened, some kind of neurological glitch. But what intrigued me more than the diagnosis was the cause of this neurological glitch. It was stress. Not I'm a little overwhelmed stress, but paralysis. I could not move. And so the fact that I'm standing here in front of you all today is nothing short of a small miracle, because I had to then rely on other people. The nurses, the techs, Rachel, my parents, to care for me. I couldn't bathe myself. I couldn't get out of the bed without an assisted device. I could no longer pretend to be strong, and it was humbling to be that vulnerable. But what I learned in this entire situation is that when you cannot carry yourself, you notice very deeply the folks who will carry you. When you can't show up for yourself in grief, you remember the folks who brought meals over. When you cannot bathe yourself, you remember those that came and helped you wash your face. You remember how folks showed up. You remember what it felt like to be lifted, to be guided, to be protected when you cannot do it on your own. And so that's what was so radical to me about this particular text. It wasn't necessarily about the fact that the man couldn't walk. It, for me, was the fact that the man was kept outside by the crowd. The man could not do anything for himself. These men lowered him through the roof, and he then had to be vulnerable enough to receive it. They didn't wait for an approval. They didn't wait to take a vote. They didn't ask permission. They disrupt everything that was going on for the sake of another. That's what access means. And still, finally, what about the roof? Any of y'all in here besides Stephanie think about what that roof might have cost? What it might have cost to tear through that roof? Or what about the mess that tearing through this roof probably made? We don't talk enough about what it means to create access for people. We don't talk about what does it mean for the folks who are kept on the outside to put a ramp up to the door. What does it mean to someone who has hearing impairment to have a sign language interpreter speak what is being spoken? What does access mean to those who are vulnerable? We don't know what repairs needed to be made. We don't know how much it cost. We don't know who perhaps got hit with something that was falling from the roof. But what we do know is that somebody walked out whole because someone else was willing to carry them. Someone walked out liberated because someone was willing to tear off the roof. You all, we need to ask, what structures are we willing to break if it means letting someone in to this space? What ceilings need to be torn? What systems need to be disrupted? Because the gospel is not just about what we build. The gospel is about what we're also willing to break for the sake of love and for the sake of access. And this is not just some theological frame I'm offering. We here at United Church of Hyde Park are quite literally asking what of this building needs to be broken so that healing and access can happen. The world has changed out there, y'all. People need space, and they need community that they can come into and feel like they belong. We are in the process of discerning a future that honors our past for sure, while we're opening the doors and tearing off the roof for something that is bold and something that is so needed. As most of you all know, and as we'll probably update at the congregational meeting, we're working to be in partnership with the community builders and exploring what does it mean to offer housing and support to seniors in this very neighborhood who want to age in their neighborhoods. They want to be in a community where they feel like they belong and they have dignity. And so we are preparing and discerning and reimagining, what does this even look like? Ask yourself that question. What might we imagine? How might metaphorically and quite literally tearing off the roof change access to what God is calling us to be so that other folks might be liberated? My prayer for us is that we be the kind of church that is not so consumed with the tearing off of the roof, that we be more consumed with who will have access to what rests in this space. The spirit, the love, the community that rests in each of us. Maybe healing isn't just for the ones who couldn't walk. Maybe it's for everyone who thought the house of God belonged to them alone. And so may we be the kind of church that doesn't wait for people to fit into a box before we make space for them. May we be the kind of friends who carry one another even when we can't move. May we be bold enough to tear through the roof, even if it makes a mess, because someone is outside waiting to get in. This indeed is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.